In this piece, I want to talk about being highly sensitive and being different and the shame messages around that. So, I got all the normal messages about being a guy, being a boy. And I noticed right off the bat that they were instructive more than responsive. What I mean by that is I was not observed, listened to, watched, and validated in what I was feeling or doing or wanting to do or talking about. I was being instructed that you should feel this, that there's something wrong with you if you don't, and that this is the way guys and boys are, and just go and be that way. Just go and do that. We don't want to hear anything that doesn't fit with that narrative. And so, so that was the narrative, and it just confirmed that I was fundamentally fucked because I didn't fit with that narrative, and I thought this must be it. This is that fatal flaw that I'm looking for, but it really isn't who I feel and who I am. So, first of all, from that deep sense of abandonment, insecurity, and stuff, and which I mentioned a couple of videos ago, what I really wanted was bonding and to be close. I wanted that more than anything. Because it was the one thing when I would have a few moments of that, it was the one thing that would allow my body to calm down and not be in this hyper state. And that's what I wanted. So, but everyone looked at me as if there's something wrong with me for wanting that. And so I learned that telling the truth was not safe in this culture. It didn't get me what I wanted. It got me odd looks that said, you better not go too far outside this bound or we're going to come up with some kind of a label. And you wouldn't like that because we all know what we do with people we label. We pretty much discard them and don't interact with them anymore. We interact with our judgments about our picture of the label, which is about 3 steps removed from the human being. So we're not going to interact with you. We're going to interact with our judgments about the label of you. And so there's you, then there's the judgments, then there's the label, then there's our relationship with the label. And you're just, out in the cold. So we're gonna do that. So you don't want to do that. So come along, give us a few crumbs here so that we can pretend you're a normal guy and kind of accept you. And that pattern, by the way, is consistent my entire life. It doesn't matter the group. If I'm with a bunch of Republicans, a bunch of business people, a bunch of women, a bunch of Democrats, a bunch. Everyone has their little narrative and their story about what's good and what's human and blah blah blah. And for the most part, we as a culture seem to want to interact with our ideas about the labels that apply to people rather than the person. And kind of the best you can hope for is to be in one of the good labels as opposed to the bad labels. And they're not very technically defined because they don't hold up. You know, labels don't hold up all that well when scrutinized. But the brain loves them because they're heuristic, they're lazy. We really don't have the ability to synthesize, you know, all the millions of variables, like the 256 million colors. It's like, that's just red, you know, let's just call that red. We're going to leave out the blue spots and all that because too much effort. That's red, and I don't like red. Or that's this, and I like it. So we do have this ability just to kind of keep up with all the data flooding through our brains of making these little boxes. But being still locked in trauma and knowing there were good boxes and bad boxes, and they weren't very intelligent. I mean, it wasn't... what I meant was I could see they weren't scientifically applied, meaning this person doesn't actually fully fit in that box. They're just being given that box as a little bit of a convenience because it's too hard to think of another box. So that's not scientific. And then what's good about it isn't scientific because it doesn't actually add up. You know, if you do the math and look at the results, it's not working very well. You know, and just, you know, in the political example, for example, I went to Copenhagen and I was stunned by the absence of fear. I couldn't find anyone who was scared. And I'm talking about this underlying anxiety that, for example, I have, which I've been very conscious of as a result, and which I experience in at least 20% of Americans, because they know they're about 3 months and 1 or 2 accidents away, and sometimes much less than that, from being on the street shamed and abandoned as a loser. That's an American reality that a lot of Americans live with. It's not a reality that the Danes live with. In Denmark, they have free health care that's better than ours. They have free college and education that, as far as I can tell, is at least as good or better than ours. The beauty of their cities, Copenhagen, is about 3 times more beautiful than any American city I've seen. The quality of life is up. Free job training. So there's a whole population of totally secure, cared for, very socially oriented adults who have never gotten close to the edge and realized their whole society would abandon them if they made a few mistakes or if this or that bad luck happened. And none of them hate their government. I was expecting that, and because we've all, you know, heard all the vitriol about high taxes, etc. in the U.S., and Denmark has some of the highest taxes in the world. I worked out my taxes about 50%. 50% of all the money that I earn goes to various government agencies, and in Denmark it's 80%. But the Danes get about 4 times more value than I get for my 50%. So I'd pay the 80% in a heartbeat to get that lifestyle, that value, that security. Because while it's, quote, taxed, they get an incredible return on that investment. And so, you know, I look at these kind of things, and they're demonized in the U.S. because they're a socialist democracy. Well, we can't have socialists. But the focus seems to be a little bit more on the box than we can't have a life like the Danes, because it just doesn't add up. Because who wouldn't want to be... Because this is the irony. We've been told, about how the people want to milk the system and are losers and blah, 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 and how everyone just wants to lay in bed and do nothing and, rip off the government. The exact opposite was what I learned talking with the Danish. Because there's free job training, free maternity leave, free higher education. First of all, they're all college educated. Why not? It's fun. We like to learn. We're a learning species. So they didn't just lay in bed and do nothing. They got higher educations. Second, with those higher educations, they're highly curious and motivated to contribute in the world. And so you don't get bitter, burned out, cynical, jobbers working at McDonald's and stuff that don't like it. You get people who are curious because if they learn about a new science or something, they'll stop, and they're passionate about it. They'll stop their current job. They'll get retrained with full government support, and then they'll go into that new industry with passion, with a focus that they're there because they want to be there. And if they're not there. Because they do get free unemployment. But it's boring to sit around at home. And so I learned, just how much stuff doesn't fit into these labels. They're not very scientific, but you can't have that kind of a conversation with a Democrat or a Republican in the U.S. because they're not focused on the reality of the Danes. They're focused on the pictures and the judgments of their labels of those words. They don't want to see the actual reality. So this is a level of dissociation from reality with an obsession around labels and ideology that's quite lonely, because you don't matter as a human being. You only matter to the extent that you fit in or don't fit into a box. You don't really matter there. It's the judgments and opinions about the box that matters. This is pretty painful. And looking for that deep bonding that I didn't get in all that abandonment and torture and stuff, I really noticed this kind of stuff. And being highly sensitive was a big taboo. Like, just don't be sensitive. Don't notice these things. Don't think about those things. Don't ask these questions. And there was this constant pressure to conform, be like a normal boy, fit into these labels. And this was just confusing. So that was a level of confusion, shame and rejection, and some anger that people want to look at the boxes rather than at the human beings. So that's another piece of this journey. And let's see what the next one is.